Hi, I'm Phil Richards. Today we're at the Juno Lighting Group Remote Idea Lab Studios. We're going to talk about the mechanical features of our IC22 6-inch recessed housing. Now, at first glance, it maybe doesn't look too much different than a typical 6-inch recessed housing, but this product is so feature-rich, I think that you're going to be surprised when the presentation is finished. As a matter of fact, I sometimes talk to tradesmen and electricians who have literally been using the product for years, and I show them some little trick or gizmo on there, and they say, wow, I never even knew that you could do that. First thing that I'm going to do is start in the middle, and you can see that blue plastic part in there. That's a socket overspray protector. You know, on a job site, after those recessed housings are installed and the drywall is up, next come the fellas with the airless spray guns painting the ceilings white. And if you don't have something inside of that socket to protect it from getting all filled up with paint, such as the socket overspray protector, you have to go in there later and clean them out. In the older days, sometimes guys would crumple up newspaper and shove it up in there, but we've saved you the trouble already. So I'm going to remove that, and when I pull that out, what you can see is our nickel-plated copper screw shell. And you may be wondering, what is the significance of that and why should I care? Well, if you're an end user or the consumer, and you have this in your house, you may actually have run into a situation in the past where you went to unscrew a lamp from a socket and the bulb came out in your hand, and you're looking at that fixture up there, and the threads from the bulb are still up in the fixture. The nickel-plated copper screw shell will prevent that, so it's an easy release every time. Moving right along then, what I'm going to do is unscrew that socket from the back of the socket plate. So I don't even need to take it out all the way. I'll just loosen it and kind of give it a twist, and it'll come out on the wire leads. So these wire leads allow me to have the room and also the flexibility of snapping that socket into the back of a trim that allows us to adjust the lamp position, for instance, to aim it at a picture on the wall. So I'm going to kind of set that in there, and we're going to be installing first one of our Ultra trims, which is wet location and airlock rated. And before I do that, I'm going to need to push that socket plate all the way up into the top of the can so that I have room for the socket sticking out of the top of that. So I'm going to take a flat-bladed screwdriver and kind of pry up those little supports, past the stops, and get that pushed all the way up, kind of into the ceiling of that can. And I'll retighten the wing nuts so it stays up there. And there's one very important thing on this trim, and it says insert spring socket tab into smaller slot first. Very important. So I'm going to insert that spring into the top of that opening for the socket and push that tab on in the spring in the smaller slot first, and then kind of swing it in, hit the other side, and there you can see my socket is in there nice and tight. And one of the other things that I like to do is I like to take these torsion springs and kind of pre-flex them, fatigue them just a little bit before I push them in, and it makes it just a little bit easier to slip those springs into those C-shaped clamps that you can see there that are the torsion spring grabbers. Some folks like to call them bullhorns. So I'm going to just set it right here on the upside down and squeeze those and slip them into those little clamps and push it in, and there you have it. Now, if it turns out that you're doing a lot of these and you really don't want to spend the time pushing that socket plate up, you can order an IC23, in which case there is no socket plate and the socket is positioned with the threads facing up inside of the can so it doesn't get full of paint. And that's just a little time-saving feature for the contractors who might conceivably be doing hundreds of these a day on a job site for a building development. So let's take a look at a wet location lensed shower fixture. You can see this is actually in two pieces. And so what I'm going to do is insert the reflector piece, the top piece first, And I'm going to take that socket out of the aperture there and squeeze those springs again. And this time I don't have a small slot and a big slot. They're both the same, so it should just go in very easily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up these little slots with those C-clamps so that when I push the trim in, it's going to go right through both layers. I'm going to push that in and line them up. And there you can see, that's kind of a heat deflector that prevents the housing from becoming overheated. It gives us a little bit higher heat rating on the lamp. And then I'm going to squeeze those torsion springs and put them right through that slot on each side and push it up. And there you can see, there's your finished appearance for your lensed shower trim. I'll remove that now. And just one more that we're going to show you with that same type of installation, yet another variation. And here we have an eyeball, right? I think we've all seen these, and this of course would be if we want to light a picture over our mantelpiece or something like that. So again, very much the same drill, a little easier than the last one. I'm going to squeeze those springs and slip it right in the back. Pre-flex my torsion springs just a little bit so they don't get away from me. And slip those into those C-clamps. And now you can see that when I actually rotate and move that, the socket is moving with that, right? So I can rotate and adjust the vertical, make the vertical adjustments on the aiming of that lamp with my eyeball. The last style trim that we're going to take a look at is our standard white baffle trim. And with this one, we don't need to do anything with that socket plate. We're going to leave the socket in the exact position that it's in on the plate, just as we remove the product from its packaging. And so what I'm going to do with this one is simply place that over the aperture, and one has to kind of align that. On the inside of that socket plate, you can see there's kind of a long slot with a dot there with a little hole. I call that a dot dash. And there's also a little loop. Two loops, one on each side, that you could hook those springs into. The springs are attached to the baffle, and that little hook at the top is going to slip in there. If you have a hand that's small enough to reach up through there, often it's very easy to attach that hook. If you're a bigger guy with bigger hands, your entire hand might be blocking your view up into the aperture. For folks like that, I like to recommend using a needle nose pliers. And so let's do it. And I'll simply feed those down in there. And again, I'm doing it upside down. You'd be doing this right side up on the ceiling, of course. I'm going to grab that little loop with the spring and feed it into that slot and hook it. Here's the first one, looping it on. And here's the second one. And there you can see your finished installation there. All it needs is a lamp at this point and some power. And let's finish our analysis of the inside of this housing. Okay, so we're not even quite through yet. You can see that on the inside perimeter of that housing, you've got 3 black screws. They're a Phillips screw. If I loosen those screws just a little bit, I can actually lower the can part down a little bit farther below the plaster frame to give myself bring myself that edge just a little bit closer to the ceiling line. Or I'm wondering if my wire connections are good and I want to go back and check the wiring. I can take those screws all the way out. So having removed those screws around the inside perimeter, I can now let that cylinder drop through the center of the plaster frame. All right, so this would be like this, right on the job site, and you can see that's hanging. And I can just reach right up through there and flip that little latch, take the cover off, and inside that junction box you can see my black hot, my green ground, and my white neutral wire. Now, if your preference is for the quick connects, you would order an IC22W. While we're actually at it here, and I'm showing you the junction box, you can see that it's accessible from below the ceiling. It's also accessible from above the ceiling with that same latch arrangement. And we have a whole series of, well, what we used to call knockouts, but today we call them pry outs. So I can come into that junction box with conduit, flexible conduit, Romex, and merely kind of wiggle one of those back and forth, and I've got the knockout that will allow me to put my connector through there. Right here, we have 4 little Romex Pry Outs. Okay, so of course I can use a take-all connector on a Romex connector and come through one of these standard round pry outs, but I also have a little built-in Romex grabber in here that actually substitutes for a connector. So if you look at that part right there, I can push a piece of Romex through, and that little clamp will grab that, and I'll be able to actually, you can see I could dangle that by that Romex. That's a 55-pound strain relief, which actually qualifies as a connector per National Electric Code. You can see that this is a fairly generous sized junction box, and also there's actually a 3/4 inch knockout over here on the side. 3/4 inch knockouts might be important if you were doing light commercial work, say in a maybe a small retail shop in a strip mall, and they typically use 3/4 inch conduit for that. So we do offer a full-size 3/4 inch knockout on the junction box. Again, the junction box is very generously sized and rated for 8 number 12 wires. And what that actually means is I can use this as kind of a home run box and tap off of that to 3 additional housings, using this as a central point from which they derive their power. Now, when we flip it over on this side, let's take a look at some of the features that have actually made us famous, and that is the nail. Okay, so Juno was the first ones to actually attach the nail to the bar hanger, and something special about that nail, and that is if you take a real close look at it, we call it a bugle-headed nail, and you can see that it's actually sort of shaped like a trumpet at the end. And one of the things that we found out in our research with contractors and builders is that it's really not at all uncommon for housings to have to be moved after they've been installed. Maybe the architect or the customer does a walkthrough and says, hey, wait a minute, we need 3 cans over the kitchen island, or you don't have the latest plan, we moved those already. They may have to detach the housing from its installed area and move it over a foot or what have you. And that bugle-headed nail always makes it possible to get a hammer behind that. No matter how hard you pound that nail in, you're always going to have that little trumpet part sticking out. And so you'll always be able to get your claw hammer behind that nail. And if you pull it out gently, you can actually reuse those same nails, reposition the housing, and hammer them right back in. So there's your bugle-headed nail. Also on the end of that bar hanger is a built-in clip for a T-bar ceiling. So again, going back to our shopping mall product, that you might be using this product for a light commercial installation, these little clips will get you fasten right onto the T-bar in the ceiling if you're using a dropped ceiling without the additional expense and installation of putting a special adapter on there. Okay, bar hangers. Bar hangers will actually go out to accommodate a 24-inch joist spacing. They're perforated and they're reversible. So I'm going to show you that reversing feature right now. They're also captive. They don't fall off. So I'm going to pull this out. And you can see that there are some little slots on the opposite side of the housing. And you can see I can position that bar hanger on the opposite side of the housing. That's a very important feature because With the stock position of the bar hangers, there's always a possibility that access plate for the junction box might be coming right up against a wood beam or maybe a section of ductwork that would make it very difficult to access. And by realigning the bar hangers on the opposite side of that plaster frame, it can be a very convenient feature. Likewise, one of the problems that installers run into constantly, and that is having to insert that housing into a very small space. And so the bar hangers are breakable, and you can see that they're perforated, and in the middle of each one of those nice score marks on the perforations is a hole. And that hole is what makes this kind of magical. It makes them break very, very easily. And so I've got the other bar hanger. I'm going to do that. And now I can insert that into my housing. And I can probably get that housing installed in a width of about 8.5 inches. Once we've properly positioned our fixture relative to the other ones using those hash marks for our laser alignment, we want to lock it in so that way when those drywall sheets go up, nothing gets moved out of alignment. And this is very easy to do. We've got a couple different ways to do it. We can take a screwdriver and actually just tighten that screw on the plaster frame that'll lock that bar hanger down. Or I can simply take that flat-bladed screwdriver and insert it in the slot and kind of pry that over. Either way is equally effective at making that so nothing's really going to go anywhere. So those are the mechanical features of Juno's IC22. Until next time, I'm Phil Richards for Juno Lighting Group, and remember folks, it's all in the lighting.